Dem equal mayhem. And the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is Garrick Ross.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday, podcast land.
Absolutely, podcast
Summer
land.
is here. It is beautiful and sunny outside.
Thank goodness.
And hopefully we have a good weekend ahead of us.
Which
Maybe
means,
a couple of adult beverages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sitting around.
And when it's hot outside, the coronavirus apparently begins to disappear more.
Mark, did you not miss the memo? Coronavirus is over.
Well, for your age group, for your cohort, for millennials, but apparently for boomers, it's still a serious matter. At least for some boomers, naturally, because they have health issues, and some of them are, of course, up there in age.
Yeah.
Not me, of course. But this podcast is called. But we also want to thank Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and of course Adam Katora, our producer. This podcast is called Dem equals Mayhem. That's because, as you know, we believe that the Democrats at this point are all about the mayhem nationwide, and we think they're a part of the mayhem, and they support the mayhem because of the fact that they want to defeat Donald Trump so badly.
Political agendas.
Which is sad, right? That you'd actually rather see a city burn and people lose their businesses, and we're talking small businesses, by the way, storefronts, then they would actually stand up and say, you know what, if the police can't handle it, let's call in the National Guard.
And you can support the protest movement and the reform movement and also believe that rioting is in general a bad thing. Americans, we are uniquely good at walking and chewing gum at the same time.
Because two things can be true simultaneously.
Yes, these are not.
It can be
these
true.
Are not, absolutes that you have to pick one or the other.
Absolutely, and which is unfortunately where we are in this country, right? So many people are like, no, you either are all in on the protests and the riots, or you're not. And I don't think so.
Yeah.
And the Democrats do like this mayhem because so few have spoken up. More importantly than that is all the Democrat mayors, for the most part, have allowed the violence and the looting to continue at least for one or two nights before they finally started asking the police departments to begin policing.
A lot of these cities were very overwhelmed in the initial thing. And then, look at New York City. I think that's the big example, is there was like a night or two nights where people were running rampant and could loot whatever they want without repercussions. And I think Cuomo gave the statistic that only 4,000 police officers were on duty for a city of 8 million people, if my, general...
Probably more like 10 million.
But it's a crazy number of people where 4,000 people is not enough to police a mass social movement in the streets at that time. And then, he was like at that point.
But it's not just that, Garrick. They were instructed by de Blasio to
not do anything.
To not police.
Just kind of hold the corners and, it was strange.
And then so therefore, when you're not policing, and people realize that very quickly, what happened? The police started getting attacked.
Yeah.
By the looters and the rioters and obviously the bad people, Antifa. Some Muslim folks as well who are anti-U.S.
What's crazy to me though is that people think that viewing rioting as a bad thing and that the police not doing anything was a good thing is like a popular viewpoint. I think 7 in 10 Americans are right now, if you polled them, this is where I got the 7 in 10 numbers, watching a couple of polls that came out about it, people don't like to see anarchy in the streets, regardless of how you feel about a protest movement. And, I think everybody sitting at this table, believes that those officers in the George Floyd case deserved accountability. And there are some issues with, use of force in policing. And those things should be addressed, but rioting and the lack of leadership from a lot of the cities and a lot of the
blue state governors, the blue state mayors.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was lackluster.
So listen, Nancy Pelosi, she goes on the stage and does a little press conference on the deployment of the National Guard and the fact that the president, of course, has asked for the deployment of the National Guard in various cities, and generally speaking, it works in such a way as the governor requests the National Guard to come, yes. and obviously at that particular point in time, it's the best of all possible worlds is when the mayor of the cities where the issues are say, hey, governor, I want the National Guard to come into my city.
Yeah.
And of course, de Blasio didn't want that. De Blasio didn't want that because, we don't want to militarize things. And so that's why we're saying Democrats, Dem equal mayhem, because it's not just de Blasio.
De Blasio is just terrible at his job. I mean,
he's the worst mayor probably in U.S. history.
In New York City history, at least, maybe in big city history.
And then so Nancy Pelosi gets up on stage and she talks about the deployment of the National Guard, how it was wrong. And where does it say that Trump has this ability? It's called protecting life, and it's called protecting property.
You want some general constitutional answers? He is the commander-in-chief, and the National Guard is a member of the military. So
Exactly.
it's pretty explicit right there in the Constitution. It doesn't take a genius to find that one.
And so here's a clip. You have to watch this clip closely, because first when Nancy walks up on stage, she's wearing a mask, and then of course she takes the mask off. I thought it looked better when she had the mask on, but that's just me.
Oh, boy.
Here's a clip with Nancy Pelosi.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi demanded accountability on Thursday and said the increased presence of U.S. military and federal law enforcement, including unidentified officers, in the nation's capital is alarming.
Who's in charge? What is the chain of command? And by what authority?
Pelosi urged Trump to provide a detailed list of the agencies operating in Washington, D.C., amid protests over racial injustice after the death of George Floyd.
So Washington, D.C. is a federal city.
Yes.
It is a federal city under the
supposed
control.
to be independent.
Yes, under the control of the United States Congress. And of course, the President of the United States has the right to protect the federal city. Nancy Pelosi also has the right, she does, to ask questions, critical questions like, why has the National Guard been deployed, and who else in law enforcement has been deployed? Here's the thing, who cares at this particular point in time? The whole idea is to basically quash the riots.
Yeah, I don't disagree. My take on the National Guard, I think it is useful in cities where it is necessary. I don't think you should be calling the National Guard if you're a local police force and you're and the encompassing body of them. They're not just metropolitan police, but the sheriff's offices, tactical teams and things like that can actually handle the protests. So, I think this is a crucial time where the relationship between general police and civilians is at a tense point, that it would be imperative for the police to do these things well. In a time where there's increased scrutiny on them, and they're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place, where people are rioting in the streets, and then they try to deal with those things, and then more bad things happen, and they make them onto the news, and it's kind of the self-perpetuatingly aggrandizing cycle. But I think if we can do it with the police force, we should be able to do it. But there are places where it's necessary. Like DC is, like you said, it's a federal city, but it's also most people are based out of there. There's a lot of the people who do policing throughout the city are already of military, orders.
So what you're saying is most of the government agencies are based in D.C.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, and that's why we want to.
Yeah,
we want to protect it.
Yes.
That's why we want to protect the federal city.
While all this is going on, the United States is, for all intents and purposes, a very easy target right now.
Absolutely.
It is ripe for any kind of attack that you could conceive.
Absolutely.
So it is imperative that we continue to protect, our infrastructure and the integral parts of our government.
So Pelosi, here's my point about Pelosi. She actually is arguing at a time of national emergency of, well, why would we have the National Guard protecting the federal city, let alone any other city, is really what she's asking. I mean, what kind of a leader says that when you have a riot, look, there were all kinds of reports from all of the agencies in the federal government, I'm talking about all the security agencies, that Antifa and a lot of anti-Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood groups, who are anti-US groups, were combining along with other militant groups in BLM, who, not all of BLM, but parts of BLM, and they were coming together, and they actually intended, the intel was out there, they actually intended of charging over the gate to the White House. And that's why the National Guard was there. That's why you had all these agencies there. That's why you had the Secret Service
look at that at that worst night with the Secret Service. They had some 50 officers who got injured in the line of duty.
Case in point.
It was a lot. It was overwhelming.
How do 50 officers get injured?
And 50 is not a minuscule number.
Yeah, and these are really highly trained officers.
The Secret Service is about as good as it gets.
How do you have 50 officers injured if you don't have people who are trying to hurt them and to break over the fence and attack the White House.
Yeah, and it's exponential numbers there. It was proving, I think, at least to their security apparatus. I mean, they put the president in the bunker,
and why?
Which is
and why
incredible.
Why is Nancy Pelosi not even talking about that? Like, hey, it's really concerning that we have these individuals who think it's okay to injure police officers, let alone some of our most highly trained, and they were very organized and they were trying to charge the White House and probably burn it down that's what,
Well, Mark, that is outside of the narrative that they are trying to push. And look, I don't like making, things of national issue like this to be very partisan, but it's very hard when people go out of their way to make it partisan. We're trying to talk about police reform. We're trying to talk about a tragic death. We're talking about the tragic murder of a black man in the streets by a police force that abdicated, its duty, and we're playing partisan football over the National Guard and how we're responding to riots. And it's like, to me, I don't understand why it's controversial to want peace in the streets while people are demonstrating. Want people to be safe and secure. I mean, with all these things going on. Is it controversial with
millennials? Do millennials think it's wrong that the police are stopping people from breaking windows?
Who do you think's out there in the streets right now, Mark?
The millennials,
it's
yeah,
the millennials.
Probably.
People my age are out there in mass numbers protesting and doing the things. But why I'm concerned is, you read the articles the next morning, and it seems like every night there's a bunch of people who are dying from causes that could have easily been prevented if we were doing this safely with a good police and societal cooperation, protesters and the police working together, but also, still peacefully protesting. But it's like, I saw the video that's been making the rounds in the news was the former police chief in St. Louis City who happened to go check on his friend's pawn shop and got gunned down in the streets over some TVs. This is like the things that we're waking up to the next morning. And the idea that, security and protecting that man's rights to live are controversial kind of bothers me.
Yeah, as if that has anything to do with Floyd's death, the fact that you would want to steal TVs and that's going to make everything okay. I mean, look, if you were truly concerned about what happened to Floyd, you would not be stealing TVs, you would not be stealing Rolex watches. You would instead...
You'd be advocating for the bills that were just introduced in Congress that would end qualified immunity. You'd be interested in advocating for reforms at your state and local level, not rioting.
Or you would just try to help your neighbor, who may be black or Hispanic or whatever the case may be. Help them with their education, help them with their lives, help them by giving them a job, help them by trying to get them up and out, because that's what makes America so unique. But instead, we're looking at legislation. It's like, we must have legislation. We must have, there are a lot of things we need to have, and the first thing we need to have is people actually looking inward and finding out how they can improve their own lives. So this podcast is called Dem Mayhem. You've probably seen this commercial about Allstate.
Oh, boy.
And after what Nancy Pelosi just said in her clip about how, why would we have the National Guard in the nation's capital deployed? Apparently she likes mayhem. So this commercial is for you, Nancy Pelosi. Here it is.
So get Allstate. You can save money and be better protected from mayhem. Like me.
Mayhem, like Nancy. I mean, I think we should clip that, protect yourself from mayhem. And then we'll dub in like Nancy and have her say something,
God.
So we'll find something. We're going to fix that. We're going to do that next time. We'll have a little spoof on Nancy because that's really what it reminds me of. So Judy Woodruff of PBS, continuing this whole Dem Mayhem thing. Judy Woodruff of PBS, she's been around forever. She's interviewing D.C. Mayor Bowser, who wants the National Guard out of D.C. The mayor of D.C. doesn't even want the National Guard, in spite of the fact that there were riots in the city. But more importantly than those riots is there were people in those riots who were trying to, and embedded in the protests, the good protests, there were bad people embedded there who were trying to, as we said, what were they trying to do? They're trying to attack the White House. Yeah. They defaced the World War II memorial. They defaced the Lincoln Memorial. They actually defaced federal buildings all over the city.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We have a clip with her. Yep. I want to hear what you have to say about this. So here is D.C. Mayor Bowser.
And we have seen over the last 2 nights very peaceful protests. In fact, We have seen the number of people coming down to demonstrate in front of the White House swell quite a bit ever since peaceful protesters were forcibly moved out of the way by the federal police.
Not true.
So people have come down to peaceably protest and police themselves in some ways. So if they see somebody who is not there for a peaceful protest bent on destruction, we've seen the crowds deal with them.
So two things, Garrick. So that's two things here. So the Mayor Bowser of D.C. said they were congregating in front of the White House and they were all peaceful, the protesters. Not true. Absolutely not true. In fact, as you just said earlier, then how did we have 50 injured officers? That's the first thing. Second thing, she says they're self-policing. Well, to the extent that that may be true, then that is a good thing. If you have the protesters self-policing to make sure the bad people don't go out of control. But I mean, the problem here is she's painting with a broad brush saying, well, they were in front of the White House. What's the worst thing that could happen? They burned down the White House? This is the mayor of Washington, D.C.
1812 all over again.
Yeah, except that, you know, these are communists. These are anti-government people. These are, the Muslim Brotherhood people. You know, these are all the worst of our country. Go.
2 points. First point, a little clarity of her point, though. I think there are a lot of things that she said that was wrong, but one of the things that she did say that I think needs to be discussed was she was referencing, with respect to the National Guard, anybody who wasn't a Washington, D.C. branch. So one of the interesting things about the National Guard is if the federal government requests it, they come from all over, especially for D.C., since it is, as you mentioned, a federal city.
They're called up.
Yep. So right now, there's an Indiana National Guard patrol and a Missouri National Guard patrol, policing the streets. And I think to her point, what she was saying was that, and we're going to talk about whether I agree with this point, but so you understand the context at home, she was saying that anybody who is not, directly from D.C. should be out of the city. But I think it's...
So if you're from Indiana and you were called
If you're
up,
an Indiana National Guard unit and you were requested by the federal government and sent here, she doesn't want you here because you aren't from D.C.
Yes. So what she wants is people from D.C., but the fact of the matter is it's a federal city. She's not in charge of the National Guard in the federal city. It is the federal government.
Now, would
that is
I
in
like
charge.
her to be more accommodating because in most cases it is the federal government working with the mayor. I mean, we saw this in Minnesota. It took 2 days for and the governor stepped in and told the mayor of Minneapolis or St. Paul, one of the two, get it together, use the National Guard and work with them. Because often because the National Guard gets embedded into your local police force. They don't do the policing. They support them in terms of, exerting the number of manpower to say, you can't just trample over these people, but also, moving people around and coordinating. It is essential that the cities cooperate and use these and not necessarily be a new nuisance in the process. And I think that Muriel Bowser's first duty as mayor is to preserve the public peace and ensure
public safety. And then property.
And if the federal government in a federal city believes that there is a significant threat to the idea of peace, regardless of the administration, a lot of these decisions are not solely made by the president. The president doesn't wake up and go, let's mobilize the National Guard throughout the city. It rolls through the chain of command. There's people who do studies and take a look at the situation on the ground and see if it's reasonable to put the National Guard in, and several assessments were made and presented to whoever is in charge, who then ultimately made the decision that yes, the National Guard should be here.
Sure. So get this. So Judy Woodruff of PBS continued the interview with Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C.
Yeah.
The correct pronunciation of her first name is Muriel, right?
Yeah,
it's
Muriel
like
Bowser.
Muriel Bowser.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mouthful when you say it. So Mayor Bowser of D.C., and essentially she asks her, Woodruff asked the mayor, well, who has control of the city's security? Which is just unbelievable. So we have a clip on this, and here it is.
The federal government and everybody who works for it swears an oath to the Constitution of the United States that allows Americans to peaceably protest, to exercise their First Amendment rights. And what I witnessed, from what I could see, what I think the world could see, is that those people were peaceably protesting. And the specter of federal police or other releasing munitions to clear the way so the president could make a political statement is abhorrent.
So, I mean, this is why, there was a time in America when elected officials, regardless of party affiliation and regardless of their level in government, whether it was the mayor of a city or a president of the United States or a mayor and a governor or any combination thereof, they would always cooperate when it came to the security of the United States of America.
And that is still not an uncontroversial opinion. I mean, 7 in 10 Americans are asking for what you're saying, but you have these politicians who are so used to pandering to certain, ideologies and narratives that, the greater interest of their narrative trumps the common peace and the common prosperity.
It does, I suppose, but why is it that you have so many of these mayors who are not listening to the governors, or governors who aren't listening to the president?
Because I think a lot of the same people in these streets are the same people who vote for them.
I think that nailed it right there. I mean, Dem equals mayhem. I mean, really. I mean, if you're a Democrat, you like the mayhem.
Over their electoral choices that it's
these are their voters. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are millennials for the most part that are out there on the streets.
Yeah.
Not exclusively, so I want to be fair, but mostly. By the way, my son, who's a millennial, said the exact same thing. He said, "You won't believe the Twitter feed that I have of all of my friends who are tweeting stuff that you cannot believe how they actually support rioting and they actually are supporting, things that have to do with destruction and hurting people."
And to me, it's always a little fascinating because it's a lot of these people who are on the outside looking in. They're sitting here and they're I'm going to call it their privilege, and they're looking at a lot of these communities and they're okay with the rioting there because they'll never have to experience the fallout or the effects of something like that. And to me, it's a shame because
they came from very affluent families, many of these millennials.
Yeah.
Many, or at a minimum, they came from really solid middle-class families, and they are all about, coming out.
And it's like, Mark, half the videos that I see of people rioting in the streets, it's these just millennial white kids running around just breaking into buildings and looting things. I mean,
and in some cases, breaking the windows and looting black businesses. Yeah. White kids doing that. Yeah. I'm like, I'm sorry. How does that help the black community?
Yeah, I saw my favorite video to just give everybody at home like an amalgamation of what's going on. Who these kids really are. I saw a bunch of people in California went and looted a surf shop. A bunch of surfer hippies broke into a surf shop and stole a bunch of surfboards, ran outside, hopped on their mopeds and scootered off. And I was just like, if that's not a perfect indication of who really is taking advantage of the situation,
exactly,
then I don't know who is. And it's one of the more encouraging things.
And they probably blacked out their Facebook and their Instagram profiles or what have you because, it's all about surfboards.
It's all about solidarity and solidarity and whatever their initial benefit
is. Guess what Bowser did? Guess what Muriel Bowser did? She decided to paint, of course, because she's the mayor, she decided to paint the plaza leading up to the White House, and it says on it, Black Lives Matter Plaza. So she literally, and this is on the actual street. It's a massive street and massive painting across it, Black Lives Matter Plaza. And so it says here, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser officially renamed a section of 16th Street. That is the street that fronts the White House. You would dead end to the White House if you actually drove down 16th Street. She renamed a section of it Black Lives Matter Plaza. She did this ahead of what is expected to be a massive weekend demonstration by the group in response to the death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police. And here's the thing. The BLM movement is now adopting, as are many Democrats, not all, but many Democrats so far. We're going to follow this really closely. The BLM movement is now expressing that they want to defund the police. Now, we just heard Muriel Bowser talk about how she doesn't want policemen from outside the city into the federal city to protect the city and protect its residents and protect property. And now she's literally basically jumping on the bandwagon and effectively sending these really mixed messages that it's okay to defund the police. That means to eliminate the budget that is given to the police so they can run the department.
I have two takes here. First take, as a millennial, and this is my millennial perspective, I really don't care that it's not that I don't care. I'm not for or against her painting the mural on the 16th Street. To me, if it's a sign of solidarity and it's done for the right reasons, then yeah, and I think, it's actually really cool, and, I believe that Black Lives Matter. But my thing with the whole defunding the police thing is,
well, here's the problem.
I would want to see how do you operationalize
I believe
this?
Black Lives Matter too, but what the heck does that have to do? What does that have to do
Well,
with
that's my point.
defunding the police?
Well,
The problem
yeah.
is that the BLM movement is an all-encompassing movement that means a lot of different things.
To a lot of different people, yeah.
And that is very dangerous. That is very dangerous because you're saying, as the DC mayor, you're endorsing a movement that believes in large part. In fact, I would love to see that poll, right? Poll the BLM. Do you support BLM? Yes. Do you support defunding the police? I'll bet you it's a majority of their members that believe that.
I have no idea. But when it comes to the actual policy of defunding the police, how do you operationalize that? A lot of the police, look, Mayor Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles announces that he was going to siphon anywhere between $100 to $150 million out of the police budget and redirect it to social programs.
He's the mayor of Los Angeles.
Los
right?
Angeles,
Yeah.
yes. And to me, it's like, I want to see where that's operationalized. Where's that money coming from? Because, often a lot of these police budgets...
He's cutting it from the police budget.
Yeah, but what part of it? What are you getting rid of? Are you cutting personnel? Are you cutting pensions? Are you cutting health care? What are you cutting? $150 million, which is about 1/15 of the police budget? Where does that look like? Now, what is it? The head of the Congressional Black Caucus, I forget her name. Martha Fudge, maybe? I don't know. She was running for speaker before Nancy dropped a gavel on her to make sure that she fell in line. I remember the story. She leaked a...
Nancy unleashed mayhem on her?
Yeah, Nancy unleashed mayhem. She was on an interview, and she even was like, do I think that we need to address the way we police in this country? Yes, but I don't think the answer is running around, is just pulling funding from police.
Of course it's not pulling funding.
Because we had our trial run of what the world is like without, a competent police force in some of these cities with the riots, and it is not a good outcome.
Let me tell you something that I've learned about government firsthand. What I've learned about government is this. When the pandemic started, okay, I am an elected, and I rarely say this, okay, and there are a variety of reasons why I don't, but I'm going to say it this time. I am an elected official in the state of Maryland, and I'm one of those smaller government guys, and I still am, and I always will be. Less government is better government.
Yeah, and I work for
and then no sooner did this pandemic start, which, let's face it, is a very unique situation. And we get into a situation where you have massive unemployment, and it happens all at once.
Yeah.
Our state's unemployment system crashed. So
It's
naturally,
still crashed.
so think about this, guys. Think about this, podcast listeners. You go to work, and your employer says, "Look, I'm really sorry. We literally are told by the health department and the state and the governor that we have to close the business. So therefore, I can't afford to keep anyone on the payroll because there's no money coming in the door. So I really apologize." So you go, "Man, I get it, but this is just awful for me and my family because now I have to figure out how I'm going to pay my bills." So the first thing you do is you go home, you get behind your computer, and you apply online for unemployment benefits with the state. And you find out that the state website is crashed and that you can't even get on the website to apply.
Yeah.
And
then
so
you do it 2 weeks later, you finally get on, and then they implement the new system, and then it crashes all over again. And then half the people who got their benefits now don't have their benefits.
Still don't have their
the
benefits.
Cycle all over again.
So we literally have tens of thousands of people in the state.
Hundreds of thousands.
And it's probably even more than that, but I'm talking about people that still haven't received their benefits.
Crazy numbers.
And, we have 500,000 people who have applied for unemployment, I'm sure at least by now, and tens of thousands who applied months ago and still haven't gotten their benefits. So you might ask yourself,
How does this connect?
How does this connect? It connects because government does have a purpose, and it's supposed to be there for you during these kinds of emergencies. And I believe in smaller government and efficient government, and what I've learned is that when you really want government when there's an emergency. So
Yes.
You know what we really want when there's an emergency? We want our police departments.
Yes.
We want them there. We want to, when we call 911, we want them to be there.
Yeah.
Just like with unemployment, when I call up unemployment, I want someone to answer the phone and say, yes, I'm here to help you. I understand you lost your job. I'm here to help you. And I believe that that's the function of government. Unfortunately, it's not functioning in that way, at least with the unemployment. On the police department side, however, look, this is me. This is just Mark Fisher of Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial might think something different, but I believe the vast majority, in fact I know, the vast majority of policemen across this country are incredibly wonderful people. They're family-oriented people. They love their families. They love their communities. They wake up every day. They put their lives on the line. They do the right thing, and it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy to hear Democrats say that they're all about mayhem because they hate the president so much. They'd rather see the country destroyed than they would anything else.
So this conversation that we're having right here, I believe, is a part of a bigger conversation about what people want the fabric of this country to look like in the next, 100 years in respect to the last 100 years. And what you're seeing is two very different ideas of America and of government. One that follows what you say, and one that believes that, the state is the ultimate arbiter of all the things that we do, and that, this government is inherently bad. I've seen a lot of people make the argument that it is naturally racist. And so what we're going to see is, well,
the argument hasn't been that the government's racist. The argument has been that
the system is racist.
That we have systemic racism, which you and I talked about last podcast. I find that completely offensive in my case because I'm not a systemic racist. I'm not. And so this broad brush thing is just ridiculous. There are actually two articles that we're going to read, at least parts of them, from the Wall Street Journal that just came out recently that really address this issue. And unfortunately, the people that most need to read them, of course, would never read anything from the Wall Street Journal. Not necessarily because they don't like the Wall Street Journal, but because they probably just don't read anything. And they probably don't know a whole lot about American history and just don't care. Go ahead. Finish the thought.
No, I mean, I think the thing that I meant by this is that, this conversation that we're having is going to, like I said, it's going to be part of a bigger struggle, and it's up to people that are sufficiently believing in the greater good of America, the America that I believe that we are, despite our flaws and our shortcomings. Events like George Floyd's murder, I think is a stain, but I don't think it is indicative of an entire system. I don't think it represents that America is a failed state, as I've seen people on the news talk about. And it's
MSNBC, CBS, NBC, CNN.
And it's a shame because, look at the progress that we have made in the last 400 years. Look at the progress we've made in the last 80.
We're going to do a podcast on that, by the way, just so you know. We are going to do a podcast once this blows past us, this being the riots and the looting. And once we get past this, we're going to do some podcasts on solutions, proposed solutions, as well as the true American experiment, and where we've come and where we came from and where we're going. And I would definitely want to have a full staff, if you will, here of millennials, because that's definitely going to be worth listening to what they were taught in K-12 and in college versus what we were taught, and our respective perspectives.
Yeah.
So
my last thought real quick on this, though, is to conclude that point, why I love America and I'm proud to be an American is that this country uniquely offers us the opportunity to have these conversations with our government, with our leaders and our elected officials, where we can have a reckoning on how we deal with certain things, and we can do it peacefully and cooperatively and come to solutions where, there's a lot of countries out there, a lot of other people who are major players in international affairs who are vying to be the United States in the world who don't have that opportunity, who oppress people who have these conversations.
Most of the rest of the world doesn't have rule of law. Most of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Most of the rest of the world.
Or the rule of law is a dictatorship. And it's a totalitarian government.
Well, which means there's no rule of law.
Yeah.
I mean, by definition, it means there's no freedom, there's no
justice, no equal opportunity under the law, and things like that. Yeah.
So get this, the Hill newspaper, talking about the National Guard, the Hill newspaper said 125 lawmakers in Congress urged Trump to support the National Guard, but the caveat is by support they mean with new entitlements. They want new entitlements. In other words...
Yeah, so I read this article. It's an interesting one. So what happens is...
95 Democrats and 29 Republicans.
Including Ted Cruz.
And 1 independent. So in other words, they're kowtowing during an emergency and saying, hey, we know there's a national emergency, but don't worry, we're going to give you additional entitlements as a result of you volunteering to be in the National Guard.
Right.
No one forced you to be in it. You chose to be in it, and thank you, by the way, for being in it. But this is not the time to have that conversation.
Right.
It's the worst possible pandering I think I've ever seen.
I'm not going to lie to you. I thoroughly disagree.
Well, why?
So for all disclosing purposes, I come from a military family.
You think the timing? You think the timing is right?
So what this letter was is, when it comes to National Guard deployments, you go on active duty, right? And you're federalized, and you go on federal active duty, and there's an 89-day period, right? Mm-hmm. So within those first 89 days, you are not owed anything in terms of benefits, and how they usually do your deployment cycle is they mark off those 89 days, and then on the 89th day, they pull you back, and they put you back on state active duty, so that you don't qualify for any programs. So what this letter was advocating was that all these people who are doing, pandemic responses for the National Guard across all the states, that they can enter that 90th day, and then they can claim the benefits that would have been owed to somebody who remained on federal active duty for longer than 90 days.
They wanted, there was a lot more. There was a Christmas tree of stuff.
Well, yeah, but there's a lot of things that come with it. You come with retirement benefits, leave of absence, health care plans, things like that.
This is not the time to have that conversation. This is because...
So they can come and respond, and they can do their duty for... This has been a 3-month thing, and it's like...
Out of all the things that Congress has to work on, this is... And out of all... And we have a national emergency and a variety of... We have an international emergency, right? We have a world economy that is not doing well. We have a rivalry with China that could very well end up in conflict.
This isn't earmarking new money, though. This is just allowing them to apply into a pool of already allocated money.
It's the same old, which drives me crazy, which is trying to use a crisis to buy off an interest group. And I hate when crises are used for that purpose.
I don't see it as buying off an interest group, though. I think it's giving soldiers what I think is honestly due to them. You can work for 89 days.
And that's a great line for a politician.
They work for 89 days. You sound like a politician now. 89 days
they work
on active
so
duty.
Hard. Of course they work hard.
And then on the 90th day, they're just like, oh, sorry.
Of course
and then
they
you don't get all the things that anybody else gets.
We know they work hard. That goes without saying. What the issue is are we using this crisis to try to expand entitlements when we have depression level or approaching depression level unemployment?
It is simply letting a group of people who are working to go over a threshold. I mean, it's not going to expand to everybody in the National Guard. It is just those people who are working.
This is what Mark and the Millennials is about. Finally, a disagreement. So get this: a family of a Muslim man who ended up stabbing a police officer in New York. The family says that the Muslim gentleman is not a terrorist. And look, you could say, yeah, well, he just wanted to stab the cop. He's not a terrorist. Just because he's Muslim doesn't make him a terrorist. That is true.
No, but the act in itself is probably terrorism.
But it is an act of terrorism. That's the problem. So the man is suspected of, clearly he did it, there's video, I believe, stabbing an NYPD cop in the neck without warning. He did it without warning, this man, and is a practicing Muslim whose family is originally from Bosnia. But his family says he's absolutely not a terrorist. A relative who was interviewed by federal terrorism investigators said Thursday that his family said, he's not a terrorist, So the relative also said that Mr. Kamovitz, 20 years old, never expressed any anti-police sentiment to him and questioned the official account of Wednesday night's incident in Brooklyn. I've known him since he was 6 inches tall. That is not terrorism. It's illogical, said the middle-aged man who declined to give his name when describing the Muslim who ended up stabbing the cop in the neck. And I just want to say this. The article goes on to say, and I'm not going to read any more of the article, but the article goes on to say that the FBI has been onto this family for years because they have been in contact in the past with radical Muslim groups overseas.
Right.
But there isn't anything that really is a nexus to say that they have themselves radicalized until this incident. So, you know, once again, it's Democrat mayhem, right? We have lots of people who are in the streets and they have grievances for all different things.
Right.
And they have gotten together in some cases. In other cases, they're just, you know, in this case, just a Muslim guy who's angry at the United States of America because, you know, he doesn't like Western civilization. What a surprise.
Right. I don't think he's a terrorist because he's a Muslim. I think he's a terrorist because the act that he committed is sheer terrorism, regardless of who did it. You know, indiscriminately walking into the street and stabbing a cop, who I believe was a Sikh. You know, he was of a religious minority, and you know, I don't know what his motives were, but regardless, I mean, you know, that is on its broad, very fair definition. Terrorism.
I don't think he's a terrorist. I don't think he's a terrorist either, just because he's a Muslim. I think it's a terrorist because of what he did.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's also. I think he's also his family are leaning towards terrorism. And I also think that we, you know, once again in the United States of America, need to really think about why would we want to let people in our country to become Americans who fundamentally don't believe in and loathe and hate Western civilization? They don't belong here. I'm sorry. If they want to come here to visit, great, come visit, spend money, and then go home. That's just my personal opinion. If, on the other hand, you are someone who loves our culture and wants to come here, and you really want to live the American dream, I don't care what your religion is.
I
don't care where you're from. Come here. We want you here.
Was he a born American citizen, naturalized, or was he on a visa? Do we know any of that information?
The family is from Bosnia. However, my understanding is he was born here,
right?
Which is really interesting because.
Well, I mean, look at the two.
But that's proof of why the parents and the uncles and the extended family are very much involved in really nefarious activities. Just saying.
Right.
So get this, podcast listeners, the Wall Street Journal has an editorial in it by Daniel Henninger entitled America's New Nihilism. And I just want to read some of this and I really highly recommend that you read this because it was in the June 3rd issue of the WSJ. And he starts out, he says, "This is not 1968, it's worse. The late 1960s were the heyday of modern American liberalism, which was then an ideology of hope. A bipartisan Congress passed landmark civil rights legislation in 1964 and 65. The precipitating event of the urban riots in 1968 was the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
New York, Trenton, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, Kansas City, and Washington were on fire. Yeah. Arguably back then, despite the passage of LBJ's Great Society programs, not enough time had passed for liberal policies to ameliorate conditions in the inner cities. Last week, however, George Floyd died after rough treatment from arresting Minneapolis policeman Derek Chauvin, who was arrested and charged with murder. Since then, there have been daily protests accompanied by riots, pillages in American U.S. cities. A primary claim made repeated this week is that the U.S., which means the American people, are guilty of perpetual systemic racism." And he basically goes on and says, since the 1960s, essentially little has changed in these neighborhoods. At the center of those long ago urban riots, by current telling, they are about as poor, as crime-ridden, as undereducated, in poor health as they were when LBJ first passed the law. That means 5 decades of stasis and stagnation in America's most marginalized places, virtually all of it under Democrat, now progressive political control. The article goes on and on. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but you get the gist of it. And while we have intimated this throughout Mark and the Millennials, our various podcasts.
He just came right out and said it.
He finally came out and said it. And what I find interesting, this is what I find interesting about millennials, is are millennials even focused on this part of American history where trillions of dollars have been spent in these inner cities and the outcomes are worse than they've ever been? And this is after over a period of 50 years.
You know, Mark, I am going to... No.
Speechless! Speechless, I tell you!
Because it's Mark, I think your point's pretty valid here. You know, I think a lot of people in my generation don't really see outcomes
were they taught this history?
Or numbers. Or
were they taught this history?
Mark, do you think that people in college college professors are going to start chucking LBJ under the bus. I mean, Great Society is basically
not LBJ and not FDR. That's for sure.
No, those programs have been reskinned and instituted in a number of different ways by progressive regimes over the course of the last 40 years, and it's unfortunate because it's the question I always ask when people around my age are like, well, why don't you support this movement, not movements, but why don't you support this policy or that policy? And it's because we've already seen the policy. Like, it's already been tried. It's already been done. It's like...
And we've had 50 years
of it. And I'm like, look, who are you going to vote for in these cities that is anything different than what you have gotten for the last however many number of years?
It's all the progress that they say that they're going to make,
and the councils
is always
that are
so
associated
marginal
with them, and it's like, and it pains me because these politicians, and it's regardless of aisles, because I've seen the challengers on the other side come in, but they all give these lofty cells that they're going to change this fundamentally and that fundamentally.
However,
and they're going to put money at this issue.
In these cities, it's Democrats.
Issue.
It's Democrats.
Yeah.
The Democrats control the mayor's office. The Democrats control the city council offices. The Democrats control and appoint every aspect of government from top to bottom in all these major cities. They have, and they've done so for 50 years. They own it.
We talk about Baltimore a lot because it's in our backyard here in Maryland.
It's in our backyard.
The last time Maryland had anybody who wasn't from the Democratic Party elected mayor was in 1964, right? The last time that they had anybody on
more than 50 years
city council was 20-something years ago. The idea that, we can come in with this... And it's not that I have any issue with actually, it's a lot of issues with politicians, but it's, we make all these promises, they make all these promises, people who want to be elected in these cities, and they can never go through with them, and we always wind up in these same situations where over and over and over again, we have to do this big comprehensive bill and that big comprehensive bill.
So look. So
and we always do them, and they never work.
I just want to stop you there because we're going over it a little bit, but I do want to have that discussion in a podcast by itself, seriously, and to have a full staff of folks, especially from the millennial perspective, because seriously, just to end this part of the conversation, I truly believe that most millennials don't know about this history
because it wasn't taught,
and they think
there's widespread issues that I think I have a minor in history, so I really do believe that history is an integral part of how we study ourselves, the decisions we've made, and the outcomes from them. And you can't understand the things that we do going forward without understanding the things we've done in the past. And it's like,
how are you going to know how to
as
improve?
Somebody who is, and a lot of people don't study history like I studied history. And I didn't even study history to its fullest extent. And, I still think there's a lot that I need to learn. But when you do go through the mandatory public school, they just don't teach you any of these things.
It's incredible.
The same stuff.
I'll just say this. I'll finish with this because we have to move on. Is in the state of Maryland, every single legislative session, because we have them every single year for 90 days, and in the state of Maryland, every legislative session, there is a dump truck load full of cash that is loaded up from the taxpayers of the state, and it is dumped into the city of Baltimore, and there's never accountability, and there's never any improvement. In fact, there's only more decline. And I have a sneaking suspicion this is happening across America because after 50 years, as Daniel Henninger said in the WSJ, things have gotten worse. They certainly haven't gotten better. So get this, podcast listeners. The Pennsylvania Health Secretary tries to justify the BLM protests while forcing small businesses to remain closed. So imagine if you're in Pennsylvania, your small business is closed because you're not essential. But if you're the BLM protester, and if you're protesting as part of that group, well, the Pennsylvania Health Secretary thinks that's okay, even if it's a massive group of people. We have a clip on this, and you can look very closely at the Pennsylvania Health Secretary because I'm sorry, she doesn't look like she's well to me.
I thought it was a he.
It's a guy, and it's got I'm assuming is that his hair, or that's really long because he is transgender, I believe.
Questions I can't answer.
Yeah, I'm not. So we have a clip on this.
I just don't know.
And here it is.
Can you clarify the administration's position on May 11th? Business owners were called cowards for wanting to reopen their businesses, and today the governor is actually marching in that Is that not in violation of your order and his order for large gatherings?
Well, so we have, then the governor has always said that people have the right to protest and to demonstrate and the right of free speech. And so overall, we want large gatherings such as maybe a party or some type of concert or something to be under 250 people. But we are not restricting people's right to protest. There are also obviously significant social issues, that are present, that people feel that they need to have a voice. And so the governor is always supportive of that and is participating in that.
So that is
Welcome
the health
to the
secretary.
movement. Opening it all back up. Well, welcome. It's great to see you.
Yeah, you can't open up your small business in the state of Pennsylvania, but it's okay to protest en masse. And
You know what
it
this
doesn't
reminds me
matter
of?
about whether you keep 6 feet away from people, because let's face it, it's going to be impossible anyway.
Do you remember? You know what this reminds me of?
What?
Did you ever see those Dana Carvey SNL skits where he was doing George Bush back in the day, and he'd be like, if it's down here,
Wouldn't be
it's
prudent.
bad. Wouldn't be prudent. Good. And it's like basically under 250 bad, more than 250 good.
It's true. And remember, this was the same lady that basically came forward and said that she took her mother,
Out of a nursing home.
Because people were dying left and right from nursing homes.
You couldn't do it.
And she didn't inform the public about
She was doing it.
that she was doing it.
And
She
if
moves
you've
her
seen,
mother.
nursing home deaths have been the single largest cause of coronavirus deaths in the United States.
And here's my thing. This is why I say Democrats are all about mayhem, the name of this podcast, because here you have the Pennsylvania Health Secretary that's all about mayhem, because what applies to her, letting her mother move forward to a facility by herself and getting her mother the heck out of these nursing homes to save her mother, and I don't blame her for that, but she didn't tell the rest of us she did it. It doesn't apply to the rest of us. Just like keeping small businesses closed doesn't apply to protesters. And this is what's wrong in America, because
There should
the
be two
same
sets of
people,
standards for different people.
You can't have two sets of standards, because
I think
that's in
everybody-
part why the protesters are out there. They're saying there are two sets of standards.
Yeah.
There's one standard for black people, there's one standard for white people, and meanwhile we have government setting two sets of standards.
Yeah.
One set for themselves and one for everybody else.
Yeah, I think I have no problem with the protesters in the street regardless of COVID-19. I have no problem with small businesses opening up. I think we shouldn't be living in this delusional fear that COVID-19 can ruin every aspect of our life.
Absolutely. And Matt Walsh, who writes for, what is it, the Daily Wire?
Yeah.
And was it just the Daily Wire?
He's a contributor for a bunch of different places,
That's what I
from my
thought.
understanding. A lot of these guys that write, they write for whoever. And
He
everybody.
underscores what the Pennsylvania Health Secretary did. Namely, he says, George Floyd's funeral is expected to have hundreds or thousands of attendees, more like thousands, including high-profile politicians like Biden. Meanwhile, people have not been allowed to go to their own family members' funerals because attendance was capped due to COVID. And look, obviously this gentleman, Mr. Floyd, deserves a proper funeral, but so does everybody else.
Yeah, especially people who died of COVID, because it is a moment in history. It is, I think to a lot of people, they don't understand the scope of how big of an event COVID is, and that the people who died from this disease truly died a very tragic and in my opinion, very preventable death.
And still haven't had a proper burial or a proper funeral. And this is
one of the things that makes America uniquely American is how we honor and celebrate our dead. And I think it's also important for people mourning, and it's important for society to progress as a whole, is that we're able to celebrate the death of our loved ones, especially from such an event like this.
But here's what I would challenge the Pennsylvania Health Secretary. I think it's Dr. Levine, if I'm correct. I'm pretty sure that's the doctor's name. So, Madam Health Secretary, why don't you also look at all of the folks in Pennsylvania who died in nursing homes, and look at how many of those people were people of color, and basically, you know what? If you're really concerned about the BLM movement, Madam Secretary, why don't you make sure they have proper funerals? Because they died and they were forgotten almost immediately, and I got to tell you, while we have it on video that this police officer had his knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd, I think the government had the knee on the neck of the nursing homes and literally committed murder against thousands of people in these nursing homes.
I can't
That's my
imagine
opinion.
not being able to be with a loved one while we were burying them. You know,
Or during coronavirus, just going to visit them.
Devastated. Yeah.
Absolutely. So get this, podcast listeners. A naked man in the Bronx
Oh boy.
gets pummeled after
Is
charging
this your favorite
pedestrians
topic, Mark?
in the Bronx. No, you gave me this topic, apparently.
Did I? I don't remember.
So a man in the Bronx, he gets pummeled because he's charging pedestrians. And he has absolutely no clothes on except for white socks. And we're bringing this up because...
Sounds like the Red Hot Chili Peppers in the 90s.
we have a clip on this, and it's properly blocked out, but it's mostly just noises because the guy just is charging people. Apparently, he was on drugs, obviously PCP, perhaps.
That was a foregone conclusion.
So, and we always like to talk about something funny every podcast because we need humor now more than ever. And here it is. Here's the clip. Oh my God. I think he violated the 6-foot rule for social distancing, don't you?
Drugs are bad, kids. Okay.
He wasn't wearing a mask. He violated the 6-foot
He
rule.
was exposed.
But he wasn't actually rioting, because if he were rioting, it'd probably be okay if he were amongst the rioters. But instead, he was just, doing other kinds of mayhem.
God. You know, Mark,
It's kind of a new kind of terrorism.
You know, I can't say he didn't get what he deserved, though. I can't say that, Mark. I can't, because Mark, honestly, I don't know how I would probably react the same if I just saw him running down the street at me like that.
But it wasn't good enough that he was running down the street. It said he was literally charging at people. And it's like, dude, really?
Yeah. Stay away from the hardcore stuff, dude. Just,
Exactly.
God.
So, next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. Do we have a lead up, Mr. Assistant Producer? Yeah. Here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and you won't believe it. The dumbest bill in America is banning the public from the legislative process. Let me say that again. It's to ban the public from the legislative process. What does that mean? Well, in the state of California, what a surprise, in the state of California, they have introduced Assembly Constitutional Amendment number 25.
California, it's a constitutional amendment.
Yes, they love these constitutional amendments, and its purpose is to, during emergencies, to prohibit the public from participating in any kind of legislation because it's an emergency. So here's what it says. The measure would permit the legislature to restrict the public's physical access to a proceeding subject to the provision if it was warranted by circumstances of a state of emergency. Now, to be fair, this is what the bill said. That was its intent. And then it has since been, of course, amended. They amended this out, but what they haven't changed is that during emergencies,
Proxy voting.
you can proxy vote. You meaning a member.
Remotely.
You could, if you're a legislator,
Yes.
you're elected at the assembly level in California, the state senate or the assembly, you can just vote from your house. And let's face it, if there's an emergency, the state of California, of all places, they have every intent of excluding any kind of public input. Thoughts on this as a millennial? Would this concern you?
I've seen a lot of terrible bills in state legislatures get defeated because a bunch of people came and made a ruckus in a committee hearing. And something like this, taking the voice of the people out of the legislative process concerns me because
it's huge.
It's huge because how do you...
It's the cornerstone of a republic, of a democratic, a democracy, of a democrat republic. The fact that you elect people, but then they inform you as to what's going on, and then you can show up
and make a statement
about whether you support the legislation or not support the legislation, and you can do so in person or you can do so electronically and remotely.
I also hate when people want to legislate extensively during a crisis. You know, I mean,
More
there's a
power.
time when you should probably get the essentials done and leave, you know, not try to ram through as many bills as you can in such
More
a short amount
mayhem,
of time.
more Democrat mayhem. Absolutely, but my understanding is, and I have to check this because we haven't had the time because of the news cycles moving so quickly. My understanding is a couple of Republicans signed up for this too, saying, "Oh yeah, if there's an emergency, you know, we got to make sure that we can do stuff as well." And
Well, Mark, California Assembly Republicans, I can't speak for them. I don't know any of them. But, you know, I'm sure that they're not Republicans per se. You know, I'm not going to throw out the word rhino or reno, whatever the hell it is.
I think some of them are Republicans. Look, here's the background.
I
on this.
understand the initial concern and why people might have, like, when COVID happened 3 months ago, been like, oh my God.
Gavin Newsom was given extraordinary powers, just like all governors across America.
Yeah.
And the legislatures did this to give the governors exclusive powers and lots of emergency powers. And this is the assembly in the state of California saying, you know what, we don't want to be left out in the future if there's an emergency. We want to make sure that we have exclusive powers as well, and we're going to cut out the public in the process because, you know, those pesky constituents might get in the way of our plans.
Those voters.
Yes.
Those people who give me power. You
And
know?
that's the state of California saying that.
That's one of those things
and
that
these
really
assembly members,
bothers
not
me
not
about
me.
politicians is that when they get to a point where they think that they're just bigger than the job or, like, you know, bigger than the foundation of the job where, you know, yeah, I am blankety blank, assembly person, chairman of this such and such committee, and it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, you know, you're accountable to the people who elected you. You know, your job is to serve them, you know.
Absolutely.
You can't take them for granted, you know.
really can't.
Once you start taking your constituency for granted, you just kind of go off the reservation.
And that is
bad things happen.
That is fundamentally the issue in America now, that so many people believe that, and they've lost confidence in government. And I don't think that this bill, this constitutional amendment number 25 in California, is going to help.
I am encouraged, though, because from my understanding, despite the fact that California throws in all these terrible constitutional amendments, they're very good as a people of voting them down. They're like, I've seen a bunch of interesting breakdowns. So my dad lives in California. I'm apparently well traveled, but you know, so when I drive out there, when I go out there and I see him, it's like you'll see signs, picket signs. Like, you know how here in Maryland people put these big, vast yard signs, big like 5x8s, even like huge ones. They'll
You mean
do that
for elected officials?
For elected officials,
Okay, yeah.
they'll do these just for constitutional amendments. They'll be like, vote no on Amendment 14, and then they'll just like. And you'll see it, and you'll read the amendment, and it's like some crazy, permitting, you know, a 15% sales tax on yes, yes, and yes, and it'll like overwhelmingly lose like 80% to 20%. And which, when I read these things, it shocks me because I think all you have to do is just run into some of these cities in California and just be like, vote yes for 14, and whip up the bids to do
people
it.
are like, yeah,
but even then, like they
I'll do
struggle
it.
to be able to get those things. So
Yeah,
you know,
so-
but that's why I like. You know, for as much as I want to say California constitutional amendments, I don't mind when you leave legislation up to the people to decide, you know. Now, here's what I'll say this is dangerous, is that if California
I think that's-
votes for this and they approve it,
I
they
think
got to
we've-
wear it.
We've demonstrated that in California that has not worked very well.
It might not
Especially-
work, you
yeah,
know. I like
'cause-
when it's left up to the people, but also do your research, learn about the bill before you make a decision on it. Don't just show up and vote for it.
Exactly. So vote no on California constitutional amendment number 25.
Yeah, and if
that
you don't
is-
know,
Yep.
don't vote for it.
That's
Just,
right.
You know,
And that's the
either
last
vote
word.
no or don't vote.
And that's the last word, and that's the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course our producer, Adam Katora, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.